Beijing remained silent as French warships conducted joint exercises with the Philippines and the US in the South China Sea. Chinese Chairman Xi Jinping arrived in France on May 5th to start his visit as planned. We believe that under the cloud of the Russia-Ukraine war, it's difficult for the Chinese Communist Party or the CCP's top leadership to escape from the internal and external dilemma.
在当前世界百年变局乱局下,
In today's world, which is undergoing global changes and turbulence unseen in a century, both sides should uphold independence and jointly fend off a new Cold War or bloc confrontation. Adhere to mutual understanding and jointly promote a harmonious and colorful world where all countries can coexist. Remain forward-looking and jointly push for an equal, orderly, multipolar world. And pursue mutual benefit and win-win cooperation and jointly oppose decoupling, disruption of industrial and supply chains, and the erection of fences and barriers. During the meeting between Xi and French President Macron at the Élysée Palace, CCTV video footage and official photos of the event showed Xi drinking from a black straw cup instead of a glass like the rest of the audience, including Macron. The same is true for the three-way talks between Xi, Macron, and the EU president. Jinpei Li, an American Substack blogger, wrote, "Afraid of being poisoned or drugged? Even within the safe confines of the Élysée Palace, Xi Jinping doesn't dare to drink water." After Xi Jinping came to power, he used male waiters for the first time at a major CCP meeting. It's speculated that these waiters can immediately transform into bodyguards in the event of an emergency. In the public meeting he attended, he was the only one on the podium with 2 teacups in front of him and a designated person serving him. In this regard, most outsiders speculate that Xi is wary of being poisoned. The world is gradually noticing the peculiarity of the CCP leaders. As human beings, they are husbands and fathers, like ordinary people. However, when they enter the role of party members or leaders, their thinking becomes peculiar, and their choices are often difficult for the outside world to understand. These choices are often disastrous. On May 6, after the meeting between Xi Jinping and Macron, a statement from China said, "Both sides should uphold independence and jointly fend off a new Cold War or bloc confrontation. We jointly oppose the decoupling and disruption of industrial and supply chains." In a time of deep confrontation between the US and China, Beijing's strategy is to splinter the US-European and US-French relations as reflected in the Chinese statement. The statement said, "We are willing to import more French high-quality products. We hope France will export more high-tech and high-value-added products to China. We welcome more French enterprises to invest in China, and we will extend the visa-free policy for short-term visits to China by citizens of France and other 12 countries until the end of 2025. But France has its own concerns. The French statement said that there can be no security in Europe without security in Ukraine, and welcomed China's commitment not to sell any arms or provide assistance to Moscow, and to strictly control the export of dual-use goods. The statement quoted Macron as telling Xi, "This is what you told me very clearly more than a year ago, and you reiterated it." China's statement referred only to an exchange of views on the Ukrainian crisis. The French statement also referred to a level playing field in trade and commerce between the two sides, while Beijing was vague. China and France aren't able to reconcile the Russian-Ukrainian war, nor are they able to reconcile the problems of the Middle East. The relationship between the two can affect the relationship between China and Europe. But another European power, Germany, plays a significant role too. The German Chancellor has visited China for 2 consecutive years, and the differences between the two sides are becoming more and more obvious. Germany recently said that it wouldn't rule out the possibility of German warships traveling through the Taiwan Strait. On May 6, Xi Jinping had a trilateral meeting with Macron and the EU president.
中国始终从战略高度和长远角度看待中美关系，将欧洲作为中国特色大国外交的重要方向和实现中国式现代化的重要伙伴。希望中法关系、中欧关系相互促进，共同发展。
The Chinese statement said, "We hope the EU institutions will establish a correct understanding of China." This is something the CCP often says to the US. Now it is also said to Europe, reflecting the real relationship between China and Europe. Xi once again denied the overcapacity issue in China and said that economic and trade frictions should be handled properly. In the trilateral talks, Macron said the EU-China relationship should be resolved before discussing the two major crises in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Comme convenu, je vous propose d'aborder dans un premier temps les relations euro-chinoises, ce qui nous permettra d'évoquer les sujets commerciaux, d'accès au marché, de conditions de concurrence équitables, d'investissement, de développement harmonieux. Et dans un second temps, nous évoquerons l'Ukraine, le Moyen-Orient, deux crises majeures sur lesquelles la coordination entre nous est absolument décisive.
EU Commission President von der Leyen said the China-EU relationship was being challenged by issues such as state-induced overcapacity, unequal market access, and overdependence. She also said in the statement that the two sides discussed China's commitment not to supply any lethal equipment to Russia. More needs to be done to reduce the amount of dual-use goods going to Russia into the war zone. This does affect the EU's relationship with China. Her statement also focused on the structural overcapacity problem caused by Chinese government subsidies, her desire for fairness in trade, and her claim that market distortions are unacceptable in Europe. She also re-emphasized the need to improve the flexibility of the supply chain and de-risking. At the Paris meeting, von der Leyen said the EU urged Beijing to use all its influence with Russia to end the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine.
We agree that Europe and China have a shared interest in peace and security. We count on China to use all its influence on Russia to end Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. President Xi has played an important role in de-escalating Russia's irresponsible nuclear threats, and I'm confident that President Xi will continue to do so against the backdrop of the ongoing nuclear threats by Russia.
At the Sino-French press conference, Macron welcomed China's commitment not to provide weapons to Russia and to strictly control the export of dual-use goods. Xi Jinping's visit to Europe cannot bypass the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Beijing's attitude and practice of supporting Russia has become the biggest obstacle to Sino-European relations. Will the CCP keep its promises? We aren't optimistic. Putin is a tactical politician. He will mess up behind the scenes, and the specific method he adopts may be to announce something unfavorable to Xi Jinping, thus messing up the Sino-European relations and the Sino-US relations. It's because if the CCP stops providing weapons to Russia, Russia's invasion of Ukraine won't last. In fact, just before Xi visited France, the Russian news agency reported on May 3rd that the Chinese agricultural drone manufacturer J-Telep planned to open a production line in Krasnodar, Russia. According to reports, the first drone model assembled in Krasnodar, the J1040, is used for spraying fertilizers and sowing seeds. The report describes that the Chinese company's products are mainly aimed at Russia's Krasnodar Krai Rostov region and North Caucasus, but it also plans to sell drones across Russia. It's worth noting that these three regions mentioned above belong to the Russian border states with Ukraine and the southern regions of Russia on the eastern shore of the Black Sea. We checked and confirmed that this Chinese company sells DJI drones. Russian media reports also mentioned that Chinese brands DJI and XAG currently account for about 80% of the Russian agricultural drone market. In addition to producing aerial photography drones and spraying drones, China's Shenzhen DJI Innovation Technology Company Limited officially released its first delivery drone, the DJI Flycart 30, in August 2023, which features a large payload, a long range, and strong signals, making it suitable for transporting materials in all kinds of scenarios. Moreover, China's CCTV Defense and Military Channel reported in April this year on the military use of the DJI Mavic 3 drone. The Chinese Armed Police Force used DJI Mavic 3 drones equipped with grenade-throwing or explosive-release devices for training. For the role of DJI drones in modern warfare, a former Russian Chief of General Staff wrote a highly praised article in August 2022. Claiming that ordinary commercial quad-rotor aircraft made in China had completely solved the Russian Army's artillery reconnaissance, targeting, and fire correction problems. The official Weibo account of the Russian embassy in Beijing also posted the report, praising the Mavic quad-rotor drone made by DJI as in principle a true symbol of modern warfare. But DJI issued an urgent statement to clear the air, emphasizing that all DJI products are designed for civilian purposes and that it doesn't support all military applications. Shortly after Russian generals praised Chinese drones in October 2022, DJI was added to the second blacklist published by the U.S. Department of Defense. It has identified the company as a civil military company supporting the CCP's military modernization goals, and alleges that its products have been heavily used in conflict zones. The fact that the Russian news agency reported on China's drones at this time is probably not a coincidence but intentional. In addition, Bloomberg reported that Putin may visit Beijing from May 15th to 16th after taking office for his third term in May. For Beijing, although it currently provides Moscow with dual-use goods and also supports the Russian economy in disguise by purchasing energy and other raw materials, Russia would still prefer China to make an explicit statement or even provide it with military assistance. But it isn't in China's national interest. Therefore, the CCP has a reserved attitude towards Russia, carefully balancing between not being dragged into the Russian-Ukraine war and maintaining economic relations with Europe and the US. But it's difficult for the CCP to balance the relationship between Russia, Europe, and the US. Looking at the bigger picture, Beijing has been careful to navigate the gray areas supporting Russia, despite its worries of being sanctioned by the US. It doesn't want Russia to be too weak either, because a weak Russia isn't conducive to helping it fight the US. Indeed, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, economic, diplomatic, and security ties between China and Russia have strengthened. Since this year, North Korea has also joined the alliance. Russian-North Korean relations have largely been at a standstill since the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the two countries resumed relations after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia for a summit meeting with Putin in September 2023 was a breakthrough in bilateral relations. In January 2024, the North Korean Foreign Ministry announced that the two countries had agreed to strengthen further strategic and tactical cooperation to safeguard their core interests and establish a new multipolar international order. In April, North Korea's Minister of Foreign Economic Relations made a rare visit to Iran as part of Pyongyang's efforts to cultivate diplomatic relations by expanding ties with Moscow. Moscow asked North Korea to sell more artillery ammunition. Also in April, the CCP's number 3 man, Zhao Liji, visited North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, expressing China's willingness to work with North Korea to promote greater development in China-North Korea relations under the new situation. Under such circumstances, it can be said that the US is the common enemy of the three countries, namely China, Russia, and North Korea. For example, according to a satellite image obtained by Reuters, China is providing moorage for a US-sanctioned Russian cargo ship implicated in North Korean arms transfers to Russia. The image is dated February 11, 2024. According to RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute in England, the ship, which since August 2023 has moved to Russian ports thousands of containers believed to contain North Korean munitions, has been anchored at a Chinese shipyard in eastern Zhejiang province since February. The ship's presence at the Chinese port underscores the challenges facing the US and its allies as they try to choke off military and economic support for Russia. Russia said on May 1st that Western claims that it was cooperating militarily with North Korea were inaccurate and said its relationship with Pyongyang was neither directed against third countries nor threatening to the security of the region. The White House said Russia has been quietly shipping refined petroleum to North Korea at levels that appear to violate a cap imposed by the United Nations Security Council. The disclosure came on the first day after a UN panel of experts monitoring enforcement of long-standing UN sanctions against North Korea for its nuclear weapons and missiles programs was disbanded after a Russian veto.
The United States will continue to impose sanctions against those working to facilitate arms and refined petroleum transfers between Russia and the DPRK. We are currently working with our partners, including Australia, the European Union, Japan, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom, to announce new coordinated sanctions designations this month.
The Russian-Ukrainian war will become a decisive war between two camps, one of which is led by the US and NATO, while the other is led by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Although the Western world and the Beijing regime haven't yet broken face on the surface, the recent world situation shows that the Russia-Ukraine war has slowly turned the world into a new world where two camps are fighting against each other, and various countries are choosing sides. The Russo-Ukrainian War was the first large-scale war between countries in Europe after World War II. Some media in the US believe that the EU has more than 20 countries, most of which are small countries. Russia's invasion of a sovereign country will have a great psychological impact on Europe. China has won many times in the last 100 years by taking the right sides. It won the First World War and the Second World War. During the Cold War, the CCP first sided with the Soviet Union and then suddenly switched sides. In the end, the Cold War was won by Europe and the US, so China won again. This time, when the world started to fight against each other again, the CCP chose to stand with Russia against Europe and the US. This choice has led to Beijing's increasing isolation, both politically and economically. The most obvious crisis at the moment is China's EV industry. There is increasing pressure on China's new energy vehicles to be sold to Europe and the US. The US and the EU have complained about China's overcapacity and government subsidies. US Secretary of State Blinken, who visited China in late April, said at a press conference that China's unfair trade and industrial overcapacity has potential consequences for the world. He mentioned EVs in his speech. The crisis facing China's EV industry can be seen from the typical example of China's Chang'an Automobile. Chang'an Automobile is the oldest military-industrial enterprise in China. During the anti-Japanese war, it was the largest military-industrial enterprise in China. Chang'an Automobile is now part of the CCP's Weapons and Equipment Group. Chinese media reported that on April 30th, Chang'an Automobile's stock price dropped, and its market value evaporated by 16.2 billion yuan, or about 2.25 billion, in one day. One of China's largest security firms, Guotai Junan Securities, sold 255 million of Chang'an Automobile's shares in one fell swoop. On May 7th, Chang'an Auto's closing price was US $2. It was lower than the closing price of US $2.04 on April 30th. The financial report released by Chang'an Automobile showed that operating income in the first quarter of this year was US $5.13 billion, and net profit attributable to the parent company was US $160 million, a year-on-year decline of 83.39%. Chang'an Automobile said that the reason for the sharp drop in net profit was due to the impact of price competition. But that's not all the pressure Chang'an Auto is facing. In the May 1st wave of sweeping sanctions announced by the U.S. Treasury Department, Washington targeted nearly 300 entities in Russia, China, and other countries accused of supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Of these, the U.S. Department of the Treasury targeted nearly 200, and the U.S. Department of State targeted more than 80. This is one of the largest sanctions against Chinese companies to date, including more than 24 companies based in China and Hong Kong. On April 17th, U.S. Representative Mike Gallagher, chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and 3 members of the House of Representatives from across the party introduced the No Limits Act. The motion indicates that Chinese military-industrial enterprises identified by the U.S. government would be required to withdraw from the Russian market within 180 days or face full U.S. sanctions. The motion sets out a list of more than 50 Chinese companies, including 5 automobile companies. Chang'an International is one of them. Therefore, export channels of Chang'an to Russia may be restricted. From January to October 2023, Chang'an sold 69,384 vehicles in Russia, ranking 5th among Russia's top 10 auto sellers. The EU announced in October 2023 that it would conduct a countervailing investigation into pure electric vehicles imported from China to decide whether to impose anti-dumping duties. The investigation is expected to be completed soon.